So I want to spend just a few minutes, guys, doing a very, very quick overview, and I do mean quick, on ceilings and floors and consumer and producer surplus. I think by now most of you are feeling pretty comfortable with these concepts, but they are a little graphically messy, and I want to make sure that you're on the right track. So let's very quickly sketch out a market. And you don't necessarily have to write this one down. I'm going to review a floor, and you've already got this in your notes. I'm going to review a ceiling, and you've got this in your notes. So let's say that we have a market that, if left alone, would operate at P0 and Q0. So no ceiling, no floor. There's no interference of any kind. Now, you should be able to take a look at this and find consumer surplus and producer surplus. So what area is going to represent consumer surplus here, guys? It's going to be the area between what and what? Between what and what? Okay, so it's going to be the difference between what people are willing to pay. That comes from what? The demand curve, and what they have to pay. And in this graph, that's what? P0, right? So does everyone agree that we can find consumer surplus as this triangle right here? So remember, consumer surplus is the difference between what I'm willing to pay from my demand curve and what I'm asked to pay, which in this case is price P0. Everyone agree? And we can also find producer surplus. Remember, producer surplus is the difference between what I'm willing to accept, in other words, what will cover my marginal costs, and what I'm actually going to get. So producers in this case are going to be paid what price? Everybody, what price? Producers are going to be paid what price, everybody? P0, right? And to cover their marginal cost, we need to get up to my supply curve covered, right? So everything above and beyond my supply curve, which reflects my marginal cost, is going to be surplus. So do we agree that producer surplus is going to be this triangle right here in green? But then I asked you, what happens when we impose a price ceiling? So let's do that. So this is the example we did last class period. We imposed a price ceiling. Now, remember how I keep talking about make sure that your intuition matches your answer. What do we know about price ceilings? What do they do to prices? They make prices go down, right? And who benefits when prices go down? Consumers, right? And who's hurt when prices go down? Producers or suppliers. So that's going to help you figure out if you've made a mistake, right? Clearly, when I ask you about consumer and producer surplus, it's got to be a situation where producers are worse off and, to some degree, consumers are better off. All right, so the easiest way for you to approach this would be for first you to realize that we've got an out of equilibrium outcome because we're on this point A of our supply curve. So what quantity is this right here? Quantity what? Supplied, good. And we're on point B of our demand curve, so this right here is what kind of quantity? Quantity demanded. And what have we created here? A shortage. Everyone agree? We have a shortage. We have a shortage. So let's put in some numbers. Let's say that this is 100 units supplied, but 250 units demanded. And remember what I said. The only confusing thing here is figuring out how many units are going to be exchanged. So how many units are going to be exchanged if we produce 100, but demanders want 250? How many units are going to be exchanged? It's going to be 100. Everyone agree with that? The limiting factor is that there's only 100 units available, right? So my suggestion is that at that point, you draw a line up, right? Because I know the only thing that's relevant is going to be to the left of that purple line, right? To the left of 100. up to 100 units. Anything above 100 isn't being exchanged. Everyone agree? No units are exchanged above 100. So then, guys, what has happened to this triangle right here? It was what? Surplus that was shared by both consumers and producers. Now what is it? Yeah, it's that dead weight loss. It's gone away. Everyone agree? It disappears. So this area right here is surplus that disappears. And do we understand why it disappears? It disappears because these transactions don't take place anymore. But here's what I want you to understand. Do consumers want those units? Do consumers want those units right there? Yeah, their quantity demand, it's 250. They want those units. And without the ceiling, would suppliers be willing to produce them? If we didn't have a ceiling, would suppliers be willing to produce these units? Or more units? Not all of them, not up to 250. But they'd be willing to produce more, am I right? So do you see what we've done? We've put a price ceiling in place, and we've eliminated transactions that otherwise would be made. So we've eliminated exchanges that otherwise would take place. And that's important for you to understand. Without that ceiling, we'd have more transactions. So that triangle goes away, and we called that the dead weight loss. Everybody with me? Question?
Just to clarify, so the quantity supplied, QS 100, is like the total amount supplied.
That is the number of units that people supply. So I'm saying here, because of the ceiling, remember, producers are getting a lower price. And because of the lower price, they don't want to produce Q0 anymore. They want to produce only 100 units.
So the supply can't go beyond that. That's why it disappeared.
Well, it's not that it can't. Producers don't have an incentive to produce those units, right? Because they're getting a ceiling price. Before, they were getting price P0. So, right, remember what we've done. We've lowered the price from P0 to PC. And as a result, instead of producing Q0, suppliers only want to produce QS, 100 units. You with me? And that's part of the problem. This distorts price, and that has changed incentives, right? All right. So can we now think about consumer surplus? Consumer surplus, remember, is the difference between what consumers are willing to pay, the demand curve, right? And what they have to pay. What price are they being asked to pay now? After we've imposed this regulation, what price are they paying now? Price PC, right? So they're paying price PC, but they're willing to pay up to their demand curve. Do you see what's happening? So consumer surplus is now this red box. That yellow triangle is dead weight loss, and now they've taken some of the surplus from producers. Everyone agree? What's left for producers? Do we agree? Producers get surplus, which is going to be between what they're paid, PC, and covering their marginal cost from this supply curve. Do you agree that that blue box is what's left for producers? So guys, what's happened to producer surplus as a result of the ceiling? It has shrunk, right? The ceiling has lowered the price. So think about it. The ceiling lowers the price. We see that. Producers don't want to produce as much, so they drop their quantity supplied to 100, even though there are units that consumers would still buy from them. We've distorted the incentives, right? You agree? And in return, we create this dead weight loss, this inefficiency, these transactions that would be a win-win, but they're not going to take place now. So surplus has disappeared, all right? Let's very quickly do the same thing for a floor. So again, downward sloping demand curve, upward sloping supply curve. And if this market was left alone, let's say price is P0 and quantity is Q0. So before I even impose the floor, can we find consumer surplus and producer surplus? Yeah. So everyone agree, consumer surplus, the difference between what they're being asked to pay, P0, and their demand curve. So this yellow area, consumer surplus. And before the floor, producer surplus, the difference between what they're actually paid, the producers, and covering their marginal cost, the minimum that they would accept, because they've got to cover their marginal cost. So this triangle right here is our producer surplus. Everybody with me? But now we're going to impose a price floor. Okay? And so when we impose that price floor, everyone remember what happens here. So when we impose a price floor, where do I put that? Does that go above equilibrium or below? Above, right? For it to be a binding or effective floor, it needs to go up here. So I'm going to call this PF, price floor. Okay, so again, what's the easiest way to start? To remember that we're going to be on point A of the demand curve. So if we're on point A of the demand curve, then this is quantity what? Quantity demanded, right? And we're on point B of the supply curve, so this is what? Quantity what? Supplied. What have we just created? A surplus, right? We've created a surplus. Let's put in some numbers so we understand. Now quantity demanded is 100, right? Everyone agree? Because price is higher, quantity demanded has fallen, right? And because price is higher, quantity supplied has gone up. So let's let this be 230. So the key question that you have to ask yourself is, how many units will be exchanged? So guys, people want 100 units, but there are 230 that have been produced. How many are going to be exchanged? How many units are going to be exchanged? 100, right? Remember, just because people have produced them, there are 230 units produced, but if people don't want to buy them, are they going to get exchanged? No. So only 100 units are going to be exchanged. So again, I'm suggesting, since I know this right here, 100 units, is our limit on how many units are exchanged, put that vertical line in place to tell yourself that everything to the right is no longer a transaction. We never see those exchanges take place. So do you see what's happening? All of these exchanges in here are not getting made, right? Those transactions no longer exist. Everybody with me? So we call this what? What do we call this? The deadweight loss. And that deadweight loss, if I had to define it, how would I define it? It's part of the part of the economic pie that no longer exists, right? It's the shrinking of the economic pie. So remember, this is consumer surplus and producer surplus that no longer exists. And why doesn't it exist, guys? Why don't these portions of the pie exist anymore? Because why? Yeah, because these transactions, these exchanges between consumers and producers don't take place anymore. Everybody with me? That makes sense? So this is basically the economic pie is shrinking. We don't like this. It's a form of inefficiency. So it's inefficient. The pie has shrunk. Well-being is being decreased. So everyone understands deadweight loss, right? That makes sense to everyone? Can we now determine consumer surplus? So let's figure out consumer surplus. Remember, the floor makes price go up. So what intuitively does that tell you about consumer surplus? It should have what? If prices go up, that's bad for consumers. So consumer surplus should what? Should be shrinking, right? So remember, how do we find it? The difference between the price that they have to pay, and now they're paying price PF, the higher price, and the demand curve, right? So do we agree that this red triangle is consumer surplus, right? Everyone agree with that? That red triangle is consumer surplus. But who's better off? Producers, right? They're getting PF. Now we do have to remember they're losing some transactions, but they're getting price PF, which is far above their marginal cost and their minimum willingness to pay. So does everyone agree that this blue triangle right here represents producer surplus? So what has happened? Consumers have what? Lost. Everyone agree with that? And producers have what? Gained. So has there been a transfer? Yeah, there's been a transfer from who? From consumers to producers. Exactly. And you've got to be able to find these areas, right? So everyone can identify that section that used to belong to consumers. It used to be yellow, and now it's blue, right? That's the transfer. Now, last point, guys, what did we learn? Do economists care that much about the transfer? No, that's kind of how we divide up the pie. So economists really don't care how the pie is divided, but what we do care about is that the pie is shrinking from that deadweight loss, right? We do care about the inefficiency, all right? So I suggest that you practice with these graphs. You need to understand them. They are a little graphically complex, but I think in general you guys are nodding your head and it looks like you feel pretty comfortable. But again, colored pens are always a good thing to help you when you get this kind of messy graph. All right, any questions? Perfect.